My name is Marcus, and this is how I fought back. My name is Marcus Allen, and I've always believed that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. When I moved to Willow Bend, a picturesque suburban neighborhood just outside of Richmond, Virginia, I thought I was finally stepping into the life I'd worked so hard to build. Years of saving, budgeting, and grinding paid off when I closed on a modest but beautiful two-story home with a front yard big enough to make my mother proud. It was my little piece of the American dream, tucked neatly into a cul-de-sac where kids rode their bikes and neighbors waved politely from their porches. But that picture-perfect life started to peel at the edges sooner than I expected. At first, it was small things. Sideways glances when I walked my dog. Awkward silences that fell over conversation when I joined the HOA meetings. Whispers I wasn't meant to hear. It was subtle, so subtle I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being sensitive. But then the letters started. Official-looking envelopes from the Willow Bend Homeowners Association started arriving every week. They were filled with complaints. My lawn wasn't trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches. The shade of paint on my front door was slightly off from the approved palette. My trash cans weren't brought in quickly enough on pickup day. At first, I chalked it up to standard HOA bureaucracy. After all, everyone complains about their HOA, right? Then I noticed a pattern. Mrs. Clara James, 2 doors down, a retired schoolteacher, had her Christmas decorations deemed excessive and fine despite them being tasteful and modest. The Carters, a young black couple at the end of the street, received a citation for unapproved landscaping, even though their flower beds were identical to the White family's yard across the street, which had earned praise in the HOA newsletter. It was as if there was a spotlight on the few black families in Willow Bend, and only on us. That's when the alarm bells started ringing. The truth beneath the surface. I couldn't let this go. Not this time. Not after everything I'd worked for to be here. I spent hours at night digging. I pored over public records and scoured old HOA minutes and bylaws. I even trawled through neighborhood social media groups. What I found made me sick. It was a pattern, one so systematic and deliberate that it left no room for doubt. Every rule violation, every citation, every petty fine disproportionately affected black homeowners. The white families in the neighborhood? They got polite reminders and warnings. Us? We got threats and penalties. And at the center of it all was Melanie Harper. Melanie was the president of the HOA. A middle-aged woman who wore her superiority like an expensive scarf. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, fitness tracker always visible on her wrist, and a smile that made your skin crawl. She presented herself as the benevolent leader of Willow Bend, but beneath that carefully curated exterior was someone determined to push out families who didn't fit her vision of the ideal neighborhood. I knew I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable evidence. Complaining to the county or police wouldn't work without it. The HOA had cloaked themselves in just enough legality to fly under the radar. What they were doing was clearly discriminatory in practice, but not overtly illegal on paper. So, I came up with a plan. The bait. I decided to give Melanie Harper exactly what she wanted, a reason to act. But this time, I'd be ready. I submitted paperwork for a driveway extension. Completely unnecessary, but 100% legal. I dotted every I, crossed every T, and made sure the project met every single HOA regulation. Permits approved, city inspection scheduled, by the book. Then, I installed security cameras around my property. Discreet, but in full view. I made sure they covered the driveway, the yard, and my front door. I wanted everything documented. The work started the following week. I hired a local crew, paid them well, and told them to take their time. Not too slow to raise suspicion, but slow enough to draw attention. And attention I got. Every morning, Melanie was there, standing in her bay window with her arms crossed, watching like a hawk. Some days she even came out to inspect the progress, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes with the ferocity of someone who took herself way too seriously. I made a point to wave at her every time I saw her. "Morning, Melanie. Lovely day, isn't it?" I'd call out, smiling. She never smiled back. The breaking point. By the time the last slab of concrete was poured, I could feel the tension coiling tighter. She was about to snap. I could see it in the way her jaw clenched whenever she drove by. And then it happened. I was finishing up the final post on the gate when I heard her front door slam. She stomped across her pristine lawn, phone pressed so hard to her ear it was a wonder she didn't crack the screen. "He's doing it again," she barked into the phone. "He's violating the HOA rules. He's taunting us with that hideous extension. I want police here now." I kept working, pretending not to hear, though the smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth was hard to fight. She was pacing now, muttering about property values and neighborhood standards, recording me on her phone as if she were building her own case. "Beautiful day, Melanie," I called over my shoulder. "Don't you think?" That's when she snapped. Her voice rose to an angry screech. "You people think you can do whatever you want," she shouted, slipping into the language I had been waiting for. "You're ruining this neighborhood. I don't care what your kind think is legal." And there it was. The words she couldn't take back. And my cameras caught every second of it. The confrontation. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, Melanie was ready. She practically ran to the patrol car, pointing back at me like I was the villain in a melodrama. "Officers," she cried. "That man is violating HOA regulations. He's threatening the peace of our community. He's harassing me." The officers, two young men, polite but reserved, approached me. I set my tools down, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Afternoon, officers," I said calmly. "My name's Marcus Allen. I'm the homeowner. I have all my permits and approvals here if you'd like to see them." They nodded. I handed over a thick folder. They flipped through it, their expressions neutral. Melanie was still going. "He's dangerous. He's defying the HOA. I cut in. "Officers," I said, "this is more than a property dispute. This is about harassment and systemic discrimination. I have evidence, emails, recordings, HOA meeting transcripts that show a clear pattern of racial discrimination by the Willow Bend HOA, including by Mrs. Harper." That got their attention. I handed over a flash drive loaded with everything I'd gathered. One of them stepped aside to review it on his laptop while the other kept his eye on Melanie, whose face was rapidly draining of color. When the recording started playing, her voice captured in crystal clarity, dripping with barely concealed hatred, her facade crumbled. The fall of Melanie Harper. Within an hour, they had enough. "Mrs. Harper," the lead officer said, "we need you to come downtown for further questioning." She gaped at them. "You can't be serious. I'm the president of this neighborhood. I'm protecting our standards." The officers weren't having it. "Ma'am," one said, "you have the right to remain silent." As they cuffed her, she turned to me, her face a twisted mask of fury and disbelief. "You did this," she hissed. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself." They led her to the car as she wailed and kicked. Neighbors came out of their houses, some recording on their phones, others standing in stunned silence. And then I saw them, Mrs. James, the Carters, and the other black families. They were standing together now, some of them smiling, others simply nodding in quiet relief. The aftermath. Melanie's arrest made the local news that evening. By morning, it was all over the regional networks. Her face plastered across TV screens, headlines screaming about the HOA scandal. More families came forward. Stories poured out about fines, threats, and retaliations. The Willow Bend HOA was dissolved within weeks. A federal investigation was launched into the HOA's practices. Melanie Harper and several board members faced charges ranging from harassment to conspiracy to violate civil rights. The neighborhood changed after that. Some families moved away, those who felt uncomfortable facing the truth about their complicity. But others stayed. And for the first time, there was honest conversation about race and accountability. The unnecessary driveway extension I built? It stood as a quiet monument. A reminder that sometimes, the smallest act of defiance can be the spark that burns down a rotten system. The fight that matters. I didn't do any of this for revenge. I did it because silence was no longer an option. And when you refuse to be silent, you discover something powerful. You are not alone. Standing there that day, watching my neighbors come out of their homes, I realized that change, real change, is slow. But it starts when someone says enough. That someone was me. And tomorrow? It could be anyone.